Aloha and welcome to Thumbing Through Yesterday, the podcast where we pull our favorite books down off the shelf, blow an awful lot of dust off them in this case, and remind ourselves why it is that we used to love them. Joining me today, we've got Tony Pasculi. My name's Tom Galley. And today we're talking about one that I listed as a favorite. This is Star Trek Log 10 by Alan Dean Foster.
Yeah, based on a short story by Larry Niven, actually, which was surprising. And I ran out of time, but I meant to actually look up the original short story and read it. Have you read the short story? Oh, you've got it right there.
I've got it right there.
Good for you. Okay, great. We can get into that then.
Yep. So I almost feel like I ought to apologize to you for picking this. So we need a little context here. I listed this book not because I actually remembered the book, but because the book represents something to me. But we have to go back into a little history lesson here. So this comes from, when I was a kid. I mean, probably 7 or 8 years old, something like that. And this is back in the days of Saturday morning television. We might have a listener or two that isn't old enough to know what Saturday morning television was. So, back before the internet, back before cable television was really a thing, there were only 3 sources for TV programming, right? There was ABC, CBS, and NBC. And on Saturday mornings, they would play a block of about 4 to 5 hours of cartoons targeted at children. It was, specifically set aside time for educational TV, and educational TV meant cartoons. And Star Trek had an animated series which ran during that time. So I was a huge Star Trek fan even that early in my life. And I remember watching those Star Trek animated episodes and just being blown away. And when I discovered that they printed these, they wrote them as novels, nothing would do but that I would have them. Mm-hmm. If the wiki is to believe, Star Trek the Animated Series is the first completely novelized television series ever.
Interesting.
Yeah. But I had the complete selection of Star Trek logs, and I had the complete or the almost complete selection of Star Trek novels by James Blish. And I would just read these in rotation, literally after and after. Just as soon as I finished one, I would pick up the next. When I got to the end of the stack, I would start at the beginning. So anyway, years pass. Mm-hmm. And I'm in high school, and I've discovered, science fiction anew, and I've discovered all these new writers I had never heard of before. And I'm poking around in some book by this guy, and I start to recognize the plot. And it turns out, this is the name of the story is The Soft Weapon by Larry Niven, as you mentioned earlier. And this, it slaps me upside the head. This is the introduction to me of the idea of crossover fiction. Because this is the plot of Star Trek episode 11 or 12 in the animated series, and the subject of Star Trek Log 10. It's the same story.
So how much, because I remember the soft weapon, isn't the soft weapon about using the Kzinti encounter humans for the first time and determine they have no weapons on board, and then the weapons turn around and use their thruster as a weapon?
No, I know the story you're thinking of. The name of the ship in that is the Angel's Pencil, although I can't remember the name of the story. No, the soft weapon is you have 2 humans and a puppeteer are traveling around, and they've stopped by this particularly spectacular star. All the tourists stop there. It's a cool thing to see, which is a point they make in the novelization here. And out of habit, they run the deep scan because, that's what you do. You're at a star system, you run a deep scan, and they find a slaver box. Oh my God, how could there be a slaver box here? Literally everybody stops at this star system. So anyway, they land.
Red flag. Yeah.
Yeah, they land to check it out, and lo and behold, there's a small Kzinti attack cruiser hidden there, and they're using the slaver box to lure people in. Yeah. So now they've captured these 2 humans and this Pearson's puppeteer. And basically, again, the story unfolds in exactly the same way.
Interesting.
These 3 people happen to have the stasis box on board, and we don't find out why they've got it. It's mentioned in passing that they're bringing it back from somewhere. Yeah. They open it, and it has this thing that's probably a weapon, and they're too smart to touch. But the Kzinti capture this from them. They're not too smart to touch it. And again, it unfolds in pretty much exactly the same way from that point.
Interesting. All right. I am going to have to go back and read that story. And it's been a long time since I visited Niven's universe anyway, the known space universe, which I love. I've read, I think, everything in that sequence. And like you say, a crossover between known space and Star Trek is kind of fascinating.
Yeah.
The implications are huge. And
could have been huge. Could have been huge.
Could have been huge. They don't really dive into it, which is a little bit of a disappointment. Yeah.
Yep. So this Larry Niven apparently had submitted 2 plot ideas to the series before, both of which had been turned down. But after the original series was out of production and they brought the animated series into production because they realized, oh my God, we've screwed up. We could have made more money.
Yeah.
Larry Niven actually knew Gene Roddenberry and actually knew the whoever was the executive producer for the series. And they were hanging around his house one night, and it's actually Gene Roddenberry that says, well, why don't you just submit or rewrite The Soft Weapon as an episode? And Niven apparently went back and forth on it for a few days because, like you said, there could be repercussions with this crossover. But eventually he was like, let's see what they do with it.
It's interesting because, of all the science fiction writers working at that time, Niven, I think, would be the least suitable for writing Star Trek episodes because his particular brand of science fiction is very hard science fiction. I think of Star Trek as much more softer. It's social issues. We can get into this or not, up to you. But it's, in a lot of ways, Star Trek isn't really science fiction at all. It uses science fiction tropes to explore contemporary social issues.
Okay.
And Niven does not do that. Niven is the opposite. He's all about, this is how a neutron star works and why you don't want to approach one. So...
Which will segue nicely into our next book, actually.
It will, actually.
But yeah, so... I don't know. I mean, this is probably why whatever the other 2 plots he pitched weren't accepted.
Probably.
But yeah, nothing would do. I mean, I'm quite a Star Trek fan, and I had to, of course, plunge down the rabbit hole on this one. Yeah. And there's lots of writing by people that were attached to the project hither and thither. And in a way, it's cool because if it weren't for the animated series, the Kzinti would never have seen a television screen or a big screen, simply because they were too complicated to do in real life. And this, of course, is in the days before CGI, before even the C in CGI.
So one of the things that was interesting about this, I have a bunch of notes here, but one that is interesting is the Kzinti are a cat-like race of aliens. And there's also another cat-like race of aliens working on the Enterprise. They're actually on the bridge. And that is not something I remember from the original series. I didn't watch a lot of the animated series. I don't think I ever watched the animated series. Yeah. So there seemed to be more aliens integrated into the animated series than there were the original series or even the Next Generation.
This is a fact, and it goes back to the same reason. It's not that hard to draw an alien. It's, Star Trek aliens tend to have a bump on their head somewhere in the real life ones. But with the animated series. So many of the characters that you discover in there are standard throughout the entire series, or animated series, which was pretty cool.
Yeah,
interesting. The idea if you actually have an integrated bridge, not just with a woman, not just with an African American, but with actual aliens for a change. Well, okay, Spock was an alien, kind of.
Half
alien, yeah. But so the... I'm a little bit sad that I read behind it as much as I did because I stumbled onto a thread. Alan Dean Foster, who did all 10 of these novelizations, did not want to do them. He took it because it was a relatively lucrative contract. It was stable work. So he was gathering a paycheck for these. Now, the first, I don't remember, 6 or 7 of the novels contain 3 episodes each. And then the last 3 or 4, of which, these are examples, are only 1 episode each. The episodes were 20 minutes.
Yeah, so there's a pretty hefty novel for a 20-minute episode.
Right. So, what he says is it allowed him time to explore the characters in the universe a little bit more. What other people behind the scenes say was it was a way for him to milk 3 more novels out of his existing contract.
There is a lot of what they call in the film industry shoe leather in this one. I particularly remember around the shuttle launch where we just get the blow-by-blow of the shuttle launch, which would be like a 2-second clip, I'm assuming, in the animated series. Mm-hmm. It's like head for the shuttle and then shot of, shuttle leaving the shuttle bay. That's it.
Yep.
But here we get the whole procedure broken down. We get back and forth calls between the shuttle and the bridge. You ready to go? Ready to go. Okay, go then. We're going. Okay, bye. It's like, do we need all that, Alan Dean Foster? I don't think we do.
No, we don't. And there's actually a fair bit of question as to whether Alan Dean Foster was the person at the keyboard.
Ooh.
Because apparently, again, as he got further and further into this, he relied more and more on his wife and his mother-in-law to assist him with the writing. And towards the end, in Star Trek Logs 9 and 10, it's doubtful that he actually contributed, that all of the work was actually done by his wife and his mother-in-law.
Wow. Okay, that makes me feel better about the next thing I'm going to say.
Lay it on me.
Because there are a couple of what I call science fiction howlers in this, which is just when it's just bad science fiction. And the two that I remember that stand in my head, I read this in a paperback instead of my Kindle, so I wasn't able to take as detailed notes. But one is they refer to a character as having a wrist chronograph. And it's just like, that is just science fiction bullshit. You know, you're trying to make a watch sound like something fancy. Okay. But it's just a watch. That's problem number one. Problem number two, why does this character have a watch? I don't remember ever seeing a watch in an episode of Star Trek. They just ask the computer what time it is, right?
If they care, yeah.
Yeah, if they even care, yeah.
Which they typically don't.
So that's number one. And then number two was there's a body swap that happens late in this episode. Transporter malfunction, and the author, whoever's at the keyboard, waxes philosophical. Here's where it's not science fiction to me: is they immediately escape. They dodge all of the implications of what it would be to be in someone else's body, especially the people who change race and who change gender. There's a little bit of lip service to, I feel clumsier in this body. Nobody immediately rushes off to the bathroom to check out their new plumbing, okay? Which is the first thing I think would happen. It's all neatly contained in terms of the plot, but then there's this line, which is, he kind of waves it away and says, after all, what is a body but an envelope for the mind? And I'm like, good Lord, this person clearly doesn't even have a body, if that's what they think. Where is this coming from?
Yep.
Yeah.
No, so the animated episode, and of course the Larry Niven story, is the part where you've got Sulu, Uhura, and Spock interacting with the Kazin in the slaver box and the slaver weapon. Everything else in that was completely fabricated, right? So the subplot about the cat people going into heat and trying to take over the Enterprise, completely fabricated, exists nowhere outside of this novel. The subplot about them being ambassadors to this particular planet and miraculously having their innards switched around, completely fabricated, exists nowhere other than inside that novel.
Interesting.
The freaking opening. Oh man, so the first page of this novel is a letter that Lieutenant Uhura has written home. And in this letter, she says things that are just scathing indictments of the Federation. Like writing this letter exhausts her entire monthly allotment of external communication.
Striking, yes.
And she's concerned about how much of it will make it through the Starfleet sensors.
Yeah.
Okay, you can definitely see the world when this was written, right? Yeah. This is post-World War II, pre-Cold War, height of paranoia type of thing going on.
How pre-Cold War? This is 1978. It was written.
Okay, so Cold War's good and going then.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
And then after we get past that interesting forward, I'm just going to bash the book for a minute. We have an entire chapter that's Uhura as a child becoming a woman by killing a lion.
Yeah.
And it was just, that was awful. There's really not another word for it.
Yeah.
And then it was just so unrelated to anything that happened. And it wasn't a setup for anything. We don't explore Uhura in any depth for the rest of the book.
It was really ungrounded. Yeah. What I thought was interesting, and again, I've only read Log 10, is I was wondering if maybe that was something that happened to just delve into the backstories of these characters in a way. Because we don't know a lot about Uhura in the series. You know, she's the communications officer, and that's it. She doesn't have much of a inner life, really. So that was kind of interesting. You know, it's like, where does Uhura come from? What was her what was it like before she joined Starfleet? You know, everybody's got a before Starfleet story that we don't know.
And what ripe territory and what a perfect opportunity that could have been to explore one of these. You know.
Yeah. Well, I didn't dislike this book as much as you did, which is interesting because it's your pick.
Well, in fairness, the last time I picked this book up, I would have been in grade school. Okay. So, I mean, quite a bit of time has passed, enough time that I had no recollection that it had anything in it besides the encounter with the Kzinti. And as I'm flipping through the novel and, I've gotten, and the Kazin encounter is clearly winding down, I find myself wondering, what is the rest of the novel going to be? There's 2/3 of this thing still to go,
Yeah. I was wondering that too because it's called Slaver Weapon, and clearly it's based on a Niven short story, and that part of the story is over. It's like, I guess I've got half of this book to go. I did think that Foster did a good job of integrating that story with the ambassador story. I think
it was a much stronger tie-in than the cats in heat taking over the Enterprise, because they also happen to be cat people.
Yes.
And the first part were, cat people also.
That was a distraction, and of course, and just terrible because the animated series comes after the original series, right? Mm-hmm. So the first thing any of them should have thought is, these people are in heat. We've already seen amok time. We all know what happens. This is classic in heat behavior. So the fact that it takes them forever to figure that out was disappointing. And also, it just seemed like Foster just borrowed that wholesale from amok time.
Yeah, without, like you said, any acknowledgement of the fact that they'd been there before.
Yeah.
And the complete ineptitude of the entire medical and scientific staff on the Enterprise, and utter failure to research. And this is something that Spock had on his to-do list. Make sure the cat people get their medicine, right?
Yeah.
Something that incredibly significant, and the only person on the entire ship that has a clue.
I know.
Is the first officer.
The medical people don't know about it. It's like they should know about this. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that was bizarre. And then no one even thinks to contact their homeworld and say, "Hey, is there some weird disease that people?"
No, actually, they did. They did think to contact.
Much later.
But no, they contacted the homeworld and the starbase asking, "Is there some weird disease?"
Yes.
And this, they write off. They use this as an explanation, because what is going on is not a weird disease. What is going on is normal physiology.
Yes.
If they had said, "Is there normal physiology we should be aware of?" They're like, well, you do know we go into heat once every while, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so it was a mixed bag. It was a mixed bag for me. I enjoyed reading it. I really enjoyed the all the slaver stuff and thinking about the possible implications of the known universe integrating with the Star Trek universe. Because the slavers, for those who don't know the known universe, Niven stuff, are this incredibly powerful species that has been extinct for about 1 billion years and left all these incredible artifacts all over the universe. People find them. And it's like a Cracker Jack box. You don't know what's going to be inside.
Which has a lot of parallels to the next book we're going to talk about again.
Yes, it does.
These ended up being nice fits.
Yeah.
So, I mean, as a novel, and again, I have not read this, and I don't know, I might have picked it up as late as 8th grade, maybe not. But, so I mean, it's been decades since I opened this. So as a novel, I really felt disappointed in this. But I mean, as a representation of opening a new world, because I mean, science fiction is an incredibly huge world anyway. But the idea that you can have these crossovers, I mean, how cool would it be to see a Kazin fight a Vulcan,
It would be cool, but then once you introduce that race into your universe, you can't just write them off again. Yeah, that's
well, Star Trek. Yeah, you can. They write stuff off.
I know. It's one of my frustrations with Star Trek. Again, as science fiction, to me, what makes compelling science fiction is when you take an idea and you thoroughly explore the ramifications of it, as opposed to introducing something as a MacGuffin for one episode and then dispensing it. Yeah. As they do here with this transport. Now you have a reliable way to move people, their minds between bodies using nothing more complicated than a transporter. Is that ever going to come up again? Probably not.
Well, I know, and that was technology that was explored in the original series too.
Yeah.
You had Kirk's ex-girlfriend, I don't remember the name of the episode, but she takes his body hostage and tries to take over the Enterprise.
Yeah.
We know it can be done. Now we know how to use the transporter to do it.
Yeah.
But I mean, this is classic Star Trek. In most of the Star Treks, there is no continuity from one episode to the other.
Yeah.
Deep Space Nine and Enterprise were both exceptions to that, and I admire them for being exceptions to that.
Well, that's part of the evolution of television too. I mean, back in the day, things were broadcast and you couldn't count on your audience to have seen every episode, because if they weren't home on Sunday night or whatever, they missed it. We didn't have DVRs. We didn't have VCRs when the original series was first broadcasting.
Correct.
Yeah. So
you had to be there when it was aired.
Yeah.
And have the antenna pointed in the right direction.
It was a very synchronous art form.
That has changed quite a bit.
Yes, it has.
So I don't know. I mean, I would, having reread this, I would characterize this as pulp at this point. And I went through and I reread episode 9 or log 9 just because it was in the same book and I had it in front of me. And I vaguely remembered the animated series that it was based on. And what was better about the log 9 is that they actually expanded on the episode. It all dealt with the same characters and the same story arc.
That's good.
They took a 20-minute story arc and expanded it to fill a novel. Whereas, with log 10, they took a 20-minute story arc and then shoved 2 more vaguely thematically related story arcs in with it.
So log 9, the title of log 9 is BEM, which is the name of an alien. And do they ever deal with the idea that BEM is also an acronym, BEM, which is often used for ETs, stands for bug-eyed monster?
They do not, but BEM turns out to have a remarkable ability that they were initially unaware of, and that BEM is actually able to separate BEM's body into 3 functioning parts. So the head, the torso, and the legs come apart and each function independently.
That's really
Which
cool.
is a nice trick to have in your pocket if nobody knows you can do it.
Yeah. You really surprised people once.
Yep.
Fascinating.
And then, again, you didn't get to read that one, but there's 3 of these aliens of this type beam aboard the Enterprise with nefarious schemes, and they succeed in escaping, the best efforts of security over and over and over again because they break into smaller parts than people expect, even though everyone on the Enterprise now knows that they can do this.
Yeah. Yeah. Consequences. Not following up on them.
Indeed.
So were the original series was also novelized? Is that correct? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Those were done by James Blish.
I think I remember reading some of those back in grade school. And there's one in particular, I think they novelized Arena, which was interesting because that is also based on a science fiction short story by Frederick Brown. So they took, I don't know what the process was there, if they hired Frederick Brown to pitch an episode or if they just bought the rights to the story and wrote their own thing.
Well, now all of these, the last 3 or 4 logs, the ones that are 1 episode each, are all based on episodes that were based on other writers' short stories. So this is how Alan Dean Foster justified using them as individual novels rather than as composite novels or compiled novels like he did with the earlier episodes.
Got it.
So they have a long, proud history of making use of other properties.
Yeah. So speaking of Alan Dean Foster, it's a name that just rings in my mind as one of the science fiction writers from my youth. And now, as I'm thinking about it, I cannot put his name to a single book except for Splinter of the Mind's Eye.
I was going to open my mouth to say Splinter of the Mind's Eye.
Have you read any other Foster?
I have read, and in fact, I have in my list of ideas to pursue further down the podcast, I have a list of Alan Dean Fosters that I'm interested in looking at. And I will just go so far as to say at least my memory of the writing of the books that he wrote because he wanted to write them. He does a much better job than he, or at least his wife and mother-in-law, did in this example.
I'm pretty sure we were talking about the Science Fiction Book Club at one point, and I know I had at least one book that was a standalone novel by Foster from the Science Fiction Book Club, but I cannot for the life of me remember what it was.
Yeah, but I looked him up on Wikipedia, and a large percentage of his bibliography consists of things that he was hired to write.
Yeah.
Apparently, he became the go-to guy for, we have this film property or we have this television property, maybe even radio property. We want to have it novelized. Yeah. Who do we call? ADF. That's the man.
He wrote the novelization of Alien, I believe.
Which is definitely something the world is better for having had. I don't know. I'm knocking the guy. I shouldn't do that.
Oh, no. He's a working writer. That's something to celebrate. That's,
yep, indeed.
It's not an easy thing to be.
All right. Do you have any final thoughts on Star Trek Log 10?
I think that's it. I think we covered it. Yeah.
Yep. Well, I guess I will go out on a limb and say if you are a particularly young person and you enjoy Star Trek and you enjoy science fiction, you could do worse than picking up the series. Although they're hard to find, it turns out. They are not available electronically, at least not today.
Yeah.
I actually had to, and I've done a lot of library searching for this podcast so far, but even the libraries let me down this time. I had to resort to buying. It is in reprint currently, so the Star Trek logs are out there.
All right. Good to know.
All right. So what have we got? What have we got coming up next?
Coming up next, we have Gateway by Frederick Pohl.
Oh, there was Frederick Pohl. That was one thing we talked briefly about the novelizations by James Blish of the original series. James Blish, unlike Alan Dean Foster, took this kind of seriously. And for his Star Trek writings, he needed to recruit help. And one of the authors he recruited later in the project was Frederick Pohl.
Really? That's fascinating.
Yeah, so the number of tie-ins between this episode and the next one are really uncanny.
Yeah.
Or, okay, that's 3 tie-ins, but still, that's not bad. All right. Find us on Facebook, like us, follow us, and
listen to us.
Absolutely. Yeah, do that too. Listen to us first and foremost. And we will see you in 2 weeks.
See ya.